What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Vi was released on December 19th, 2012 after spending 2 long years moving from Champion Concept to Champion Concept. She started out very differently and actually would have been almost totally unrecognizable to you guys. At one point she was even a Corporea fighter with robot legs rather than the iconic metal gauntlets we're all familiar with today. It took a number of different takes on her appearance and backstory before a final concept ready for production was born, so we did some digging around and uncovered her history to make today's what Vi could have been. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, definitely hit that dislike, and let's get started. Vi's original concept was hugely different to how she is now, even in her name. The initial concept at Ride was for a female fighter, possibly with a backstory as some kind of spunky, energetic mechanic. The team started to run into overlap issues with Shyvana actually in terms of gameplay and couldn't really find a way to properly define her as a character. The first big breakthrough happened around a year before her release, as the concept team started exploring a female fighter with metal gauntlets at the time known as Ruby. Right at the start, she took form as this crazy girl with roller skates, barely wearing any clothes. She would roll around on her skates and had these cool late 90s, Annie DeFranco style kind of dreadlocks going on. Definitely spunky, but nothing like how we imagine Vi today. Riot definitely struggled to make this Ruby character compelling enough to move her into production though, but what they knew for sure is that they had stumbled upon the core focus for making their new bruiser a reality, a female badass with high-tech gauntlets. Ruby soon took on a new angle, losing her notorious dreads and roller skates, and putting all the design focus into her gauntlets. Honestly, if it weren't for her fists, you could believe this was a concept for perhaps a female Echo. Small in stature, but cool and streetwise. It was a step closer towards her final concept, but something was still missing. It didn't properly capture who she was as a person and get the design team fired up, so it was back to the drawing board. And around 7 months before her release, a fresh approach came in from the form of a new concept art from artist Riot Zoronis, taking her in a new punk direction and giving her a fresh backstory as an ex-criminal turned badass cop. The steampunk feel was taken a step further too, straying away from the barely clothed old prototypes and giving her a full suit of armor plating to wear. Everyone on the Champion design team immediately jumped on this as the perfect way to make the girl with gauntlets concept work, and it was dubbed as the Enforcer. It was around this time that Riot Gypsy Lord joined the Champion design team and got started on the gameplay part of development for Enforcer, after begging lead Champion designer Ziegler to let him take it on as his first ever project. The theme was already laid out for him, a punky girl who solves her issues by punching anything, usually faces. Her backstory as a criminal described her as using the gauntlets to break into bank vaults, which really set the wheels turning in Gypsy Lord's head as to how to really capture that feeling in her gameplay. It was a 6-month ride from this point until Vi's release, starting with Gypsy Lord's main design goals after hearing the concept. He described them as firstly, big awesome punches, and secondly, a focus on offense as the best kind of defense, which really suited the concept's art's super aggressive kind of feel. This is something writers refer to as a power archetype. It's about what a player sees when they look at the champion's splash art, and about how they think that character should feel and interact in the game based on that one picture. For an armored punk girl with huge gauntlets made to smash things, her abilities really need to feel impactful to deliver on that archetype and give a really satisfying gameplay experience. The last aspect Gypsy Lord settled on was that Enforcer should always be going in, not kiting around, not jumping in and out of a fight, just getting stuck in the middle of it with no escape. With those aspects in mind, he started to draft what's called a paper kit, which is essentially just a list of theoretical abilities that suit the concept. It's pretty cool because some of these designs actually did survive to find their place in her finished kit. Starting off, she had the passive Denting Blows, one of the 2 parts that survived until production. Originally, it gave her next attack after each spell cast bonus damage, along with shredding her target's armor, kind of like a homage to her backstory. After all, if she can burst through walls, she should be able to burst through armor too. However, I do say that this ability ended up in her finished kit, but it, of course, ended up as the passive on her W. The other ability that was there from day one was her Q Vault Breaker. It used to cause Enforcer to root herself, charging up her gauntlets over 2 seconds before dashing forwards, dealing tons of damage and knocking back the first champion hit. The spell was the first ability that truly just felt perfect for what later became Vi. It ticked all the right boxes. It worked with her focus of going in, it felt super impactful and just punchy, and it even lined up really well with her theme and her backstory. It was an all-around win across the board and served as a great example of how the rest of Vi's finished kit should look. At the time, her W was called Come At Me, featuring a spell that reflects back the first spell hit to her, kind of like Fiora's Riposte almost, but a little bit less fancy. Enforcer's first E ability was also called Crush, causing her to clap her gauntlets together on a nearby target, dealing damage and slowing them. It also had a bonus mechanic too. If it killed the target, it would gib them and deal Crush's damage and slow in an area of effect, along with also refreshing the cooldown. A pretty cool mechanic, but the really interesting part of the initial design for Vi was her ultimate, Steampunk Assault. Her first ultimate on paper was actually 3 spells into 1. The idea was that she would use her ultimate to dash towards a nearby enemy in a similar way to Xin Zhao's Audacious Charge, if you will, but then she would suppress them for a second. She could then recast Steampunk Assault, which would replace her QW and E abilities with bonus effects as a second cast on her ultimate. Gypsy Lord's idea was that it would work kind of like a Street Fighter combo effect, giving her control over what to do with the suppressed target after landing the initial crowd control. And while using Steampunk Assault, her Q became Beatdown, and it would extend the suppression duration and also deal bonus damage. Her W would become Slam, knocking the target up into the air and then slamming it back down into the ground, stunning all nearby enemies. Her E turned into Throw, which would literally grab and chuck an enemy in a chosen direction. So all 3 of those abilities were the second recast portions of her ultimate at the time, and it was a pretty sweet idea, but one of the big problems is that because it's an ultimate, because of such a long ultimate cooldown, you don't get that many chances to ever really use each of the options. And this essentially gets players into a habit of picking sort of quote-unquote the best option and not really using the rest of them, and gets them stuck into that sort of play pattern, which is not something that worked out quite well. The first kit did go through some playtesting, but most testers reported that it just didn't really feel the way that Enforcer's abilities should. The spells were all super cool in their own right, but they didn't really do her character justice, with the exception of Vault Breaker, of course. Vault Breaker alone is mentioned to be the one super well received ability, causing Gypsy Lord to take a step back and think about, why did that ability work so great for her while the rest of the kit just didn't? Enforcer as a character still had this really awesome aggressive feel, and abilities like Come At Me, which was her W that gave a spell reflect, were purely defensive and didn't really capture that playstyle, that theme properly, and she'd be baiting out enemy shots rather than just going in head first and asking questions later. Gypsy Lord spent a few months brewing ideas for Enforcer, and as a champion she really started to come together as he tried to pin her visceral field down. And in the new version of the gameplay kit, he settled on a punch description for every ability. Vault Breaker being Vi's own personal Falcon Punch, Denting Punch for her new aggressive armor shredding passive W, Explosive Punch for a new powerful auto attack reset and wave clear tool on her E, and the Kill the Carry Punch for her ultimate, with the idea that it'd do exactly what it says on the tin. 2 main playstyles seemed to emerge for Vi from that kit based on what it could do, and one was described as the Talon sort of style, where Vi would run in, blow all of her cooldowns, and then just run out again. And the other they called the Shyvana style, which is where she would run in, use all of her cooldowns, and then just keep fighting until the target was dead, or she needed to run to survive. Her Denting Punch was the big deciding factor on how these play patterns would work out for Vi. The first version of it was actually on her passive, and it was a 5-hit passive, one of the only 5-hit passives to ever exist, but it felt fairly unsatisfying because honestly, if you managed to hit a target 5 times, the target would be dead at that point anyway, and it gave the enemy a lot of time to escape the actual trigger of the effect. And so it was changed to a 3-hit passive to fix that issue, but then the ability ended up in this, this Talon versus Shyvana sort of playstyle kind of problem. If it had too much power, Vi would almost always be assassin-like, able to get in, do a full combo, including one W trigger, and then the target's just dead instantly. And at the same time, Gypsy Lord didn't want that ability to be weaker because it would end up feeling like just a wasted ability again. And he definitely wanted to gravitate towards the Shyvana-esque playstyle, and he found this solution by giving her an attack speed buff on top of the damage and armor shredding. That way, she wouldn't just blow up a target, and it gave her a real reason to, to stick around and brawl a target for longer, aiming to trigger her W a second time to reward players for that second proc on the effect. And so, of course, they moved that 5-hit passive, they changed it to the 3-hit passive, and then moved it onto her W and gave her a new passive to help aid that Shyvana-esque playstyle. And her eventual finished passive Blast Shield was a really cool invention because it allows her to stay healthy and gives her a sense of sustain, but without making her reliant on an actual defensive ability, which would feel pretty unlike Vi. Linking it so closely to her activatable abilities also made sure that her focus was on aggression first, and it actually helped make her quite accessible to newer players because they could play her well without worrying too much about it. After all, if you use your Vault Breaker to jump on top of someone, you're going to take some damage, and the passive always is going to help soften that blow a little bit. Now, Vi's finished W, Denting Blows, is the only ability that doesn't trigger her passive, and this was a very significant design decision aimed to give the player more control over how to use her passive, to make it a very proactive effect. It is kind of just a passive ability that gives a shield here and there, but it shouldn't feel like a passive. It needs to be something that, you take advantage of when you're brawling in a massive fight, and it does exactly that. A lot of Vi's will want to just use their free passive, but because you can auto-attack and trigger your W without using your passive, it does give you a lot more control over when to use it in an extended fight. And it's not like the passive is hard to proc anyway, so it ended up being quite a decent ability design mechanically. The only part of Vi's kit that didn't remain the same from Gypsy Lord's second attempt at her full kit was the ultimate. The Kill the Carry Punch effect was called Power Slam at the time, and it did share a lot in common with her original ultimate. It dashed towards a nearby enemy and used what was basically the slam part of her original design, uppercutting them into the air and then slamming them back into the ground, stunning everything around them in an area of effect so it would stun multiple targets. It removed the other two options and the suppress as well, which would have rendered Warwick a little bit obsolete, but it was still plagued with issues. Every champion's ultimate really needs to feel unique, and Power Slam was just coming across as almost like a bad Malphite ultimate, Unstoppable Force. It had worse range, a smaller radius stun, and was just generally easier to avoid because the travel speed of Vi herself was slower during the effect. And this essentially left Vi with not really that big of a niche to fill. She needed something to set her apart and make it worth picking her over any other champion. As her kit was at this point, she filled a similar role to maybe Xin Zhao and Jarvan, but there wasn't ever a reason to pick her over those other choices unless her numbers were just through the roof, especially Jarvan, who has impassable terrain in his kit. And so once again, Gypsy Lord went back to the lab to rediscover Vi's ultimate, the one ability that would set her apart and give her an identity of her own, and the solution was Assault and Battery. Assault and Battery was the finishing touch to Vi's kit, and it gave her an ability that no one else in the game has anything like. A guaranteed knockup at quite a long range is no laughing matter, and it made sure that no matter what, Vi would be able to reliably dive the backline. More importantly, it fits in amazingly with her lore and personality. It feels like something you could imagine Vi doing as she chased down a criminal in Piltover. It's rewarding to use, great for team play, and when you pick Vi in Champions Select, you know that no matter what, you're going to be able to crowd control a target whenever your ultimate is off cooldown. Later, after Vi's release, Gypsy Lord did mention that when it came down to her ultimate, he was concerned that although the ultimate was super fun to use, the lack of counterplay honestly made it feel really bad to play against. And looking back at it, he would probably look for another ultimate if he could have designed Vi all over again. But still, he think, Vi turned out awesome and he did a great job with it, especially for his first ever design project at Riot. And so Vi ended up being this super energetic character that wants to get in your face, and she definitely doesn't pull any punches ever. It took a while to lock down her appearance and backstory once the gameplay niche was decided, but Riot Gypsy Lord managed to figure out a kit that perfectly captures everything that makes Vi so damn cool. And she's really an example of great viscerality being incorporated into a champion. As always, we had an awesome time researching what Vi could have been, so make sure you leave us comments below about what we should cover next, and looks like that's going to be it for me. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys next time.